The Convention of the Parties of the United Nations for Climate Change, which is abbreviated as COP or COP, the 27th iteration of this convention, which just wrapped up this Sunday on the 20th, yesterday, the 20th of November 2022, came to a close with very scant, meager, and weak proposals and agreements, again, as it has for the last 27 times. This is again the 27th year that this convention has occurred, and no significant agreement or concession or achievement has been achieved, was derived or gained from this convention. Unlike in 2015, on the Paris Agreement, when the Paris Agreement occurred, with a bit more significant commitments occurred this year. Although we are in a evidently more dire situation than 2015, we are in an evidently we are in more of a crisis, both as a humanity, in the sense of the catastrophes that have occurred, the pandemic that has killed millions, the many natural disasters that have wreaked havoc in many areas of the world. Latest one being the flooding of very large areas and parts of Pakistan, the drought in parts of Somalia that have devastated and brought much suffering and death to the peoples in those areas. Just to mention a few: hurricanes, typhoons, outbreaks of tornadoes here in North America, flooding, mudslides, torrential rain, downpours that have brought flash floodings in many parts of the world. And the list goes on. Hurricanes that have devastated and killed hundreds of people throughout America. The latest one being Hurricane Ian, that killed over 110 people in the United States alone. And this is just recently. This is in October 2022. We're supposed to be an advanced nation with very advanced warning systems, weather tracking systems, yet we are still falling victim. Many of us fall victims to something as preventable and something as relatively small as a hurricane, a Category 4. Yes, it's a strong hurricane, but it is something that is very preventable as far as its destructive power, very predictable, and preparedness is relatively easy to do. Yet we fall victims to these natural disasters, these natural occurrences, because of our greed, our laziness, our focusing on the wrong stuff, such as the governor of Florida focused on deporting immigrants from the state of Texas to other parts of the United States for political gain, to do those people a disservice, to harm them, uh, while at the same time attempting to gain or draw support towards himself. This is what governors do sometimes, sadly enough and disturbingly enough, at the expense of the weak and powerless people, immigrants, migrants, asylum seekers, etc., and at the expense of their families, and those that are affected by this travesty. And while he was doing this stunt, he was asleep at the wheel in the preparation, in the warning of the population of Florida of the possibility of an incoming hurricane, which in this case did occur and ended the lives of hundreds, over 110 Floridians. And this is in some ways, limited ways, of course, his responsibility. It is the responsibility of many of us, of course, many in the local level, government, county level, city level. But it is also the responsibility of the state to protect its population and make sure that preparedness is taken seriously and performed and completed, which this did not take place. Obviously, not enough, not nearly enough, or at all. And to come back to my main point of this COP27 convention, its achievements, so-called achievements, if they are to be called achievements, is just a fund. The major central achievements, if you want to call it that, is a fund, international fund, to aid countries that are most affected by climate change, especially those countries that are poorer and weaker. And again, this is what they claim that this agreement does. We all have to be quite, even for this description that I just gave you, which sounds on its face noble and significant. I was made aware that no provisions or conditions were made to fund this collective, to channel money. No real commitment as far as the mechanism to fund this effort was agreed upon, meaning that it is a weak and very frivolous and non-binding agreement or contract. If there's not a way to enforce and this agreement, or a way to really bring the money into this fund with dates, deadlines, etc., and bank accounts, access to those funds by the actual fund, then it's not a serious commitment. It's not a commitment. Only an idea, maybe a wish, a voicing of a hope, And that is all. And to be in the situation that we evidently find ourselves in the world, already suffering the effects of climate change, the predicted effects of climate change, already feeling the first throbs and tremors of what is expected and predicted by evidence and science to come, then my friends, we are in deep trouble. If this is all that we muster to come up with, that we bring ourselves to cough up in this situation with so much evidence and so much hard proof at hand of the impending and already occurring crises due to climate change, then we are not only in big trouble, but we are hopelessly immoral, hopelessly asleep at the wheel, hopelessly powerless to take significant action. Again, we have let down all of those children and people that have taken to the streets, those activists, those people that are deeply involved in the movements for climate action, for the defacing or the phasing out of the use of fossil fuels, which is at the core of this. This is basically the most basic thing to achieve, and it was not. These conferences are more and more used for the benefit of the energy companies, especially in the last few years, than for the benefit of those that are for the protection of the climate. It has been proven and demonstrated time and again that the use of fossil fuels is among the primary causes of the climate crises that we find ourselves in. And the very thing that must change is the very thing that is being even promoted at these events, reportedly by people on the ground, reporters on the ground. Fossil fuel companies are at these events showcasing their products, showcasing their services, showcasing their projects boldly enough and rash-faced enough to do it in this conference, which is supposed to be for climate action, climate change action, prevention of the effects of climate change, and for the commitment on plans and ways and methods and funds specifically to fight climate change, to prevent climate change, to alleviate the effects of climate change. And it seems to be the complete opposite again. This is quite disturbing. This is quite disappointing that this conference closed and all that was achieved was a scant promise of funding and nothing else, or very little else, very little significance. And we continue to live as if nothing is going on, driving our gas guzzling cars, running up our power bills, cranking up the heat or air coolers at our homes, offices, and factories, cranking up production of wasteful products, using wasteful products, demanding purchasing them, as if nothing is happening all around us, as if the suffering and death of the many, many thousands doesn't matter, it's not enough, as if the suffering and death of our brothers and sisters in poorer countries, poorer areas of the world, areas hit by crop failures, famine, floods, droughts, as if those don't really matter or don't make a difference enough in our lives to make a small change, to use less air conditioning, to use less heat, to use less gas, to travel less, to purchase things that are more energy efficient, to purchase less things, to draw back on your expenses, on your expenditures, on your expansion, to conserve water, to conserve electrical energy, conserve the foods you eat. Stop being so wasteful with the food you eat. Stop eating so much meat, so much red meat, so much pork. Stop eating so much. Stop buying so much food when many parts of the world are starving. You're only taking away food from those parts of the world in a very small portion, of course, relatively small, but when looked at as a whole population, for example, of a nation such as the US, you are drawing food to the US because of the high price being paid and the demand being put on those foods, and of course, being a limited supply, the food will follow the most profitable channels. The food will gravitate towards the most profitable points of the earth and take it away from the needier places of the earth. People don't think about things like this. However, they are real, and they are quite literally logical that these things happen and will continue to happen as long as the demand is there for high cost food, and the demand is there for large amounts of food. Food being one thing, another thing being goods and services. We keep demanding big trucks, big pickup trucks. We keep demanding non-renewable energy for our fuel, for our vehicles, for our homes. We keep demanding the same and more of the same, which is what is most disturbing. We keep driving inflation up because of our habit, because of our unnecessary tendency to consume more, collect more, hoard more. Now that we are slowly emerging from a pandemic in which some of us, not by any means all or most of us, were conserving a bit more, were a bit more shy to go out and shop, were a bit more held back or limited in our travels and vacationing. But now we seem to have let loose. We seem to have come back with a vengeance. We seem to have burst out or bust out and consumed more than ever, more than before. and this stupid and retarded mentality that we have about getting it while the getting's good, getting it before it runs out, getting more, collecting more, preparing for what may be another lockdown, and getting it all, stacking and stuffing as much as we can. And that is the wrong approach, obviously. It's driving the economy not only to the ground, but prices are as high as they can possibly be. And again, driving inequality, economic inequality, to even more egregious and outrageous heights. The difference before the pandemic was bad enough. Now, after the pandemic, the economic inequality between the poor and the rich is even more. And we keep driving that wedge and making it even larger. Which, in case you don't know, it is a negative thing. It is a detrimental thing to happen. The more difference you have between the peoples, the more abuse, the more discrimination, the more problems, the more crime, the more unhappiness between the people, both rich and poor, the more friction between rich and poor because of a natural thing that happens, which is contempt, which is distrust, which is isolation. Rich and poor isolate, unfortunately, because of this gap and because of the very high possibility and likelihood of abuse, of discontent, of all of the negative things that bring that this difference brings about. Again, most of us don't think about these things, but they are real. They are statistically true. They are backed by all kinds of evidence, all kinds of proof. And it is just something that a lot of us ignore for the sake of keeping our wealth, growing our wealth, maintaining and expanding our wealth. And we ignore that this is at the behest, at the cost, on the backs of the poor, the powerless, the unemployed, the underemployed, the underpaid, the wage slaves. Because in reality, the rich pay the very poor the wages they pay them to keep them very poor, to keep them coming back. And they are spending as least as possible, to the point that it is as if they own these people through the economic system. They partly own their lives and livelihoods, even though it is on a part-time basis. Wage slavery, I believe, is real. It is as real as chattel slavery. It is something that is taking the place of chattel slavery, and it has just gone part-time. It has gone part-time, and it has improved slightly in many areas, but it has remained the same, of course, in others. There's still the same ill treatment, there's still the same abuse, there's still the same demand and talking down to and control and subjugation and manipulation as there was in chattel slavery. Talking about wage slavery, there are many things that are still the same. And I could go into this with much more detail, but this is a topic for another time. Point being is that we as a humanity have not been able to come up with real solutions and act upon those solutions. Solutions are there. Solutions have been developed, not entirely, but much advance has been made in those solutions, namely alternative energy sources, electric vehicles, efficient vehicles, etc. Yet those solutions are not nearly as widespread and utilized as they should be by now, given our situation, our predicament. And this is something to think about and consider and act upon before it gets even later than we already are. Thank you very much.